Hi there, I'm Matt Montgomery. I'm part of the agronomic team here at Beck's. Today I'm in a field of beans that saw some hail injury, and of course the understandable question on the table is, what do you think happened to final stand? I want to talk just a little bit about the process that I go through when a field is early like this. This was a unifoliate, maybe early trifoliate stage field when that event happened. And I want to talk about the process that I go through to figure out what our final stand might look like after such an event, to figure out whether or not we need to spruce up the stand just a little bit with some additional beans. But before I do that, it's absolutely critical that we get some qualifiers out there. The first thing that you should know is the process that I'm going to talk about that I specifically go through to evaluate a situation like this so early is very different from the approach that a hail adjuster will take. They have their own specific process trying to meet the important requirements of their program that they're going to go through. I'm going to approach this from an agronomic standpoint, a very different standpoint than they are. So don't second guess your insurance company. Make sure they still come out on the call. Nothing I say today replaces that visit with them. The other thing is, as I said just a second ago, don't second guess their process. Oftentimes they're going to talk about coming out to visit a few to several days or more after the event, and that's an entirely legitimate way to figure out what's happening with this field, to see what that recovery after the event actually looks like. It's perfectly fine that that's the approach they're taking. I'm going to talk about my approach that I take immediately after the event to really gauge where we are within a day or two after that event. So the very first thing that I'm going to have to do when I come out here is I'm going to have to figure out what kind of stand I'm actually dealing with, and that means I'm going to have to get out my tape measure and do a stand count. Now, I'm going to figure out what that initial stand count looks like, and then I'm going to take out my knife, and I'm going to count off 50 actual plants. I'm going to take my knife, I'm going to make a starting line, I'm going to count off 50 plants, I'm going to make another count, another mark that marks the end of my 50 plant count, and that's my initial sample that I'm going to get down on my knees to evaluate. That's another important point about how I go through this process. I can't do this standing. I'm going to have to get down on the ground on my hands and knees and look each one of those plants over. I'm going to use my knife to mark plants that look questionable. And the things I'm going to look for to tell me if those plants are questionable are things like this. If that plant is cut off below the cotyledons, it's dead. That's a plant that's over. If I have both cotyledons gone and no leaf material on top, that's a plant that may be questionable, and I'm going to have to look very carefully to see if I notice young new leaves popping out, if the growing point by some miracle avoided that hailstorm. And then I'm also going to have to make sure that I'm looking at that lower stem, that hypocotyl, that lower part of the stem, to see if there is any bruising or deep cuts to that stem. That's going to be an indicator that that plant might have a compromised vascular system, a bruised vascular system, a damaged vascular system that may give in when we hit that August heat, meaning that plant may survive for the meantime, but might not be able to go through the worst stress and might not be a yield contributor come harvest time. Those are the kind of things that I'm looking for when I walk through a field like this. And then because I've counted off 50 plants, I'm going to take whatever that number is, multiply it by 2, and that's going to give me my percentage possible reduction off of that initial stand. It's a really good way to catch at least an early indicator of what's going on in a bean field like this. But once again, make sure you get that visit in with your insurance company. Absolutely important to do so. Hey, thanks a lot for watching. We'll talk with you soon.